Hello everyone, my name is Yohana. In this presentation, I will speak about asset-based community development as an evaluation method. Thank you for your attention. As the name implies, asset-based community development approach, in shorter form ABCD, is a type of evaluation strategy that's based on the premise that communities can in fact drive their development by identifying and mobilizing existing but often unrecognized assets. The ABCD approach recognizes the importance of assets and the potential of the assets and people and social capital and networks within the community as an asset that can in fact drive change to solve problems that confront the community. Hence, it's very important, for example, to understand this process and evolution of this process as an evolution model. Therefore, one will say that the asset-based community development is a community-driven development approach that's based on local development, community themselves, in a process of asking, discussing, defining a common process or interest perhaps, and achieving this by way of mobilizing local resources and local talents. We all know that even in sometimes marginalized communities, like poor communities in poor neighborhoods or poor settings, there is talent. Talent is everywhere. Even in difficult circumstances like war or poverty, there are talented people. In fact, you could say almost everyone is gifted. Each one of us has a particular gift, talent, or something valuable to offer. This is the cornerstone of this evaluation approach. Hence, as far as problems exist, indeed, there are multiple opportunities found within the community. There is therefore the process of inward looking, you could say, or I should say, internal examination or evaluation to find solutions using local assets to solve local needs. Therefore, it's a people's-led process, a community-driven process, which is grounded in the framework of society, collaboration, collective action, collective process, and consensus building. As I said earlier, this evaluation method, called ABCD, views people within the community not as a burden, but as an assets, or assets ready to be tapped. It's a major shift, especially in the way our societies are organized today. People, especially poor people, feel so much isolated from themselves and from their own communities, and always feel that help should always come from external, quote, the outside, end of quote. ABCD builds on the assets that are already found within the community and mobilizes individuals, associations, institutions to come together to build on these assets, not merely to concentrate on their needs only. Okay, so an extensive period is spent identifying the assets of individuals, associations, and then institutions before they can be mobilized to work together to build on the identified assets of all those who are involved. Excuse me. Then the identified assets of an individual are matched with groups or people who have an interest or need in that asset. The key is to begin to use what's already in the community. ABCD builds on this idea that the key to development is to use what is already in the community. Okay, the assets in the community, the assets that are already available in the community, and mobilize them. Assets, I refer in this case to associations, individuals, networks, social capital, land, social connections, organized community, common interest. All these are brought together to a kind of build something good or something positive for the community. In short, the community identifies assets, involves everyone, mobilizes to work together in a united fashion to match those assets with people or groups within the society that most needs them. It's so fascinating to think about it. Perhaps that's the reason why I chose to do this particular evaluation method. Again, the guiding principles of asset-based community development approach are that the individual community has potential within itself. That's the background. There is capacity and potential that can be found within the community. Much of this capacity, however, is not often utilized at all or utilized to the maximum. Yes, the community has problems. Yes, there are social problems. Yes, there are economic problems as well and whatnot. But again, as this strategy implies, there are assets as well within the community that, if tapped, mobilized, and effectively matched, can be helpful to reach need points in the community. And that is very important. This is perhaps the challenge and an opportunity at the same time. Everyone has an asset, a gift, a talent. No one is to be ignored. Everyone has something to offer. Think of it. It's like a marionette, an interconnected system where each of the dots has a role to play. And it's necessary to motivate each of the actors to provide their best performance, skills, and assets. Identify them and match them to those who might need them. Okay? In other words, everyone has a gift. Everyone has connected to some sort of relationships within the community. So relationships in the community are valuable and very important. So therefore, listening and conversing among the community members and stakeholders within the community is equally important. The fundamental premise of it all, as I said earlier, is that people do care. People do care about something, even if very little or too little. But there is something that they care about, and that's what is important, and that's what the conversation in the community should center on, or should be focused, and try to arouse motivation, the natural motivation that exists within the community. On that, one other way, for example, I could give is by asking questions, providing questions rather, instead of answers. We're all entangled in this type of notion that answers are only to be found in a government setup or in an external office somewhere that you could call to find solutions. But in this particular strategy, questions are supposed to be supplied to the community, and answers are equally found within the community themselves. So the ABCD strategy fundamentally changes this whole paradigm. Community members feel confident that answers are to be found in the community, within the community itself, in the assets of their people, in the connections, networks of their people, and not necessarily from an outside force or the government, for example. To build on this quote, positive future, the ABCD approach focuses on the positive capacity of individuals and community assets rather than just always worrying about negatives, the problems, the needs, the negatives, the deficits, etc. Strengths and limitations. Now here is what is the challenge. Perhaps I could say that in earlier slides, I majorly focused on strengths of this particular approach. Perhaps now I will have to check on the downsides. So this approach has downsides to it. The asset-based approach is based on identifying assets and capacity in the community, mobilizing and matching them to points in the community that most need it. If you think about all the tedious work that goes into this, it is mind-boggling. Therefore, the ABCD approach is said to be time-consuming and sometimes very costly to apply compared to other evaluation methods. It's also a very asset-centric approach. In simplest terms, I can say that this approach, the asset-based strategy, is overly focused on strengths and capabilities and potentials of the communities, and therefore not particularly what needs or shortcomings are to be found in the community. Therefore, There is a danger of over-focusing on strengths and thereby duplicating something that is appraised within the community. Again, it's very difficult to identify the value of the assets in order to match them with points of needs. And overall, this approach is mostly centered on or is applicable to tangible assets in the community. So the question is, what is a tangible asset anyways? Or what makes an asset tangible? Finally, in this slide, I will look at what assets are analyzed or evaluated in this approach. Well, what assets and capabilities are viewed as potentially useful to find and identify within the context of a community or are found within the community? Of course, yeah, most of these assets I have already discussed in the earlier slides, but maybe I should highlight some of them here. The first one is individuals. At the heart of the ABCD approach is the asset called the individual. Okay, the individual has gifts, talents that should be recognized or must be acknowledged, valued, and identified. Think about it for a second. An individual can themselves be needy or have a need, but instead of focusing on their need so much, this approach looks closely to evaluate and identify their potential, their capacity, their gifts, their talent, their uniqueness, their capabilities, and match that to somebody else within the community that most needs it. The other asset is, of course, the associations. Of course, beyond the individual is the associations or commons or groups that these individuals belong to. The idea of the mini community, quad. These are clubs, okay, each with specific but common interest. This approach views these particular associations as an asset. It's not necessarily to deal with the individual only, but the whole group as in general. They already have common assets, common interests, and share common values and norms. In simple terms, they are already a community or a specific or special community within the community. It's therefore easier to do mobilization in this type of setting because community is already formed, so you already have a community in place. So you don't need to start building a community. You just have to use the asset that you have at hand. Of course, these associations are not structured or organized around some set of strict rules or regulations. Okay, they are a group of willing participants, and the association is by consensus. So no one is forced to be part of a particular group. Conversely, therefore, structured groups within the community do exist. They are referred to as the institutions. They are based on structured agreements, structured requirements, concessions, norms, and rules, but in a sort of a structured way. These forms of structured associations are themselves assets the community can leverage on. An example is the Whittier community-based policing project in Minneapolis, the USA, where the police department, for example, has an institutional asset. In conjunction with the community members from Whittier neighborhood, it's a low-income neighborhood, they pull together their local resources, local networks as assets, okay, in this particular asset-based development approach in order to find solutions to crimes within their neighborhoods. The other asset is, of course, the physical assets, the physical resources found within the geographic territory in which the community finds itself. Okay, this can be said to be land, etc. If the community can, for example, lease or rent out an idle land, for example, or the portion of land for an economic activity, it's a way of using an asset to meet a particular need. You cannot just simply say community is poor or we are poor. Finally, another major asset for ABCD is the connections. social capital, social networks that exist within the community. These are connections, trust, and the sense of community built over time and can be very helpful asset. The social relationships, networks, and trust form the social capital of a community. This approach acknowledges the potential of these assets to drive community development. As I said in the first slide, it's an approach towards a sustainable, community-driven development. It's a people-driven approach. So we can think of family networks, for example, peers, etc. This is my research resource. Okay, thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you had learned something or two, perhaps about the asset-based approach. I hope one day, as an evaluation expert in a marginalized community, you might be able to apply it. That marks the end of my presentation. Thank you.